Welcome to episode number 231, where I'm speaking with Dr. Judyth Shamosh about her new book, The Poetry and Physics of Eastern Herbal Medicine, where we discuss how Western culture is held captive by materialism, denying the poetry of experience, and how much we can learn from nature in regards to the system's view of life and feedback loops. So please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening. And now here's a new episode. This episode is sponsored by New World Ayurveda. If you're interested in working with client case studies from day one of your training, consider becoming an Ayurvedic practitioner through New World Ayurveda School. This way you learn the theory of Ayurveda at the same time as you learn how to apply it practically. Get a head start on working with clients by learning Ayurveda through being exposed to the most common problems clients face and how to correct them with diet, lifestyle, and herbs. The other interesting thing about New World Ayurveda is that you start learning pulse diagnosis from the very first day. They have had the most experience teaching Ayurveda online than any other Ayurveda school, and they have developed ways of teaching pulse diagnosis at a distance. And you get the chance to study Ayurveda with an MD through Ayurveda's premier online school, New World Ayurveda. For more information, go to newworldayurveda.com, and you'll also find that link in the show notes. Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Judyth Shamosh, Ph.D., who is a systems herbalist and has been a clinical practitioner since 1994. Founder of Green Fingers Herbal Medicine Clinic, she practices Ayurvedic, classical Chinese, and Western herbal medicines, and she teaches apprentices also. She has served on the governing council of the American Herbalist Guild, Arizona Herb Association, and Rainstar University College of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, and been adjunct faculty of the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine. A yoga instructor and poet, she was an assistant curator for the Phoenix Art Museum and worked in geology and archaeology. Today, we're going to talk about Dr. Judyth's new book, The Poetry and Physics of Eastern Herbal Medicine. Dr. Judyth, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Colette. I'm so happy to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Judyth, and I really enjoyed your book. And am I correct in saying that it releases tomorrow, April 1st?
Technically, yes.
Okay. Great.
That's very exciting.
Exactly. Yes. So we're recording this on March 31st. So that's fantastic that it's been released, and congratulations. And as I said, I really enjoyed reading it, and I'm looking forward to getting into some of the really interesting information that you shared with us in this book. But I'd like to start, Dr. Judyth, with your story and how you developed such an interest in Eastern medicine.
Wow, that's a long, well, it can be a long story, but I'll hit the highlights. Well, of course, my original training was as a scientist, as a research scientist in oceanography. And that never seemed to be my path, according to the universe. So I had a passion about herbal medicine and taking care of myself and my family with herbal medicine. And so I decided when I was pregnant with my daughter that I would learn everything I could to take care of her without the intervention of Western medicine. Mm-hmm. And I actually did that. She never, ever saw a doctor until she was on her own when she was about 19 or 20. So I definitely had a deep interest and passion. I grew a lot of herbs. I had a huge garden, which was actually in the Phoenix Home and Garden magazine twice, which included all those herbs. And I grew as many as I could and started tincturing them, drying them and tincturing them. And that turned into a clinic somehow. The universe leads you where you need to be, right? So I did Western herbal medicine for quite a while, for about 15 years, became very dissatisfied with it because of the fact that it was very symptomatically based. It was sort of a hit and miss. So I kept looking for something better. And fortunately, I was invited to a lecture by Deepak Chopra at one point. And he taught me, he spoke about, of course, Ayurveda. And in his talk, I heard the missing link I needed for my scientific mind to become much more happy with clinical work again. So I then went to study Ayurveda and Chinese medicine both at the same time with Michael Tierra, and then went on to study with Dr. Ladd at the Ayurvedic Institute in Albuquerque.
Great.
So that's my story on how it all happened.
Wonderful. I know there was a big turning point that you mentioned in your book, which occurred in 1988.
Yes. In 1988, I had a very severe car accident. It actually broke my back and my left tibia in 3 places. And I decided, well, of course, I spent a month in the hospital recovering. I had, fortunately, a wonderful surgeon who did miracles with my back. I bless him every day because I have never, ever had a problem with it. So Western medicine is, for trauma medicine, there's nothing better. Mm-hmm. But in terms of healing, all they wanted to do when I got back to Phoenix was give me shots for the pain, the residual pain I was having. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. Mm-hmm. So I went to Chinese medicine. No, not at that time. I'm sorry. I went to herbal medicine and other natural healing methods to recover from that severe accident. And I've gone on to continue studying ballet and riding horses. And so I was extremely fortunate that I had such good original help in the hospital. And then I'm so glad I never went for their chemical answers for pain and healing. So that was my turning point. That turned me back into herbal medicine at that point. I decided, because the work I was doing at the time, I really did not like at all. It was corporate type work, and it was very unsatisfying. And I believe the chronic fatigue that I got because of the intense work I was doing actually created the car accident. But then again, the universe has its own plans. And it was my wake-up call to start going back to what my passion is, which is herbal medicine.
Wonderful. And we're all benefiting from it now, as well as those many, many people who have come through your clinic.
Oh, yes. Yes. It's amazing when you do clinical work and you see, well, yeah, when you see how lives have changed because of the work that you do. It's so gratifying. I can't think of anything better.
Absolutely. And I really, truly believe for all of us that when we're being of service, that's when we feel the most fulfilled in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. people tell me all the time, I've saved their lives. I've changed their lives. How could you stop doing your work when people tell you stuff like that?
Yeah, it's amazing. Absolutely. Now, in your book, Dr. Judyth, I'm going to quote you here. You said, but essentially the foundation of all ancient herbal medicines is the dynamic systems method of the functional principles based on the understanding of the theory of relativity and modern physics. So I'd love for you to explain this to us, please.
Sure. Well, I needed at first to, of course, I would like to first read my theory of functional principles, or at least that's the way I see it. And it's the process of classifying herbal medicine according to the effects of the different combinations of the 5 phases, sometimes known as the 5 elements, to classify the actions and experiential effects of the 5 phases of matter on the context of the mind, body, and consciousness, to describe biological and scientific processes and principles. So that is my definition of the functional principles. And it sounds like a mouthful, but really it's not that complicated when you consider the 5 phases. And so most of you have studied the 5 phases. In my opinion, they're the foundation of Ayurveda, or actually any kind of systems thinking in herbal medicine. And that, of course, is the elements or the phases of space, air, fire, water, earth, and what they are and how they form the basis of Ayurveda. But also what has never been talked about is the science that goes along with the 5 phases. So, of course, we know space is cold and dry. It's the phase that exhibits those qualities. And why? The science behind it is because there are very few particles for friction in space. And there's also in the space the electromagnetic radiations, as well as other forces unknown to physicists. But because of the few particles, there's no friction. And without friction, you don't have heat. Right. So that's why the coldness and also the dryness, there's very few particles. So that's the basis of, that's the scientific basis for the space phase. And then as we move closer to the planet, we become more, we have more and more particles in the atmosphere. And so therefore we have more friction. Actually, if it's okay, I would love to read some of the poems that I've written for each of the phases.
I love this. And I love how you bring your poetry into this work. I think it's fantastic.
Well, to me, poetry is about being able to experience, even vicariously, what it's all about. So that's why poetry, and of course, Ayurveda to me is all poetry.
Well, that's how it was originally learned, right? As
absolutely. Yeah. Yes. So space is a place where I am cold, nothing here to warm me. So light I feel, so easy to move, nothing here to hold me. So far I see, nothing here to bar my eye. Soon I am no more, nothing here to breathe me. And so that exemplifies the rarity that's present in space, in the space element.
Wonderful.
So then we move into, as I was saying, we move into the atmosphere of the earth, and then we have the air phase. Well, in the air phase, we have a more denser atmosphere in which we live, and it's also because there are more particles, we have the potential for friction. But before we get to that potential for friction, let's talk about the air phase. Well, elusive in my hand, moved away with a puff, taken by a big motion, along with my moisture, parting me cracked coarse, chill, unsettled. So we know that air moves. We can't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there, correct? As are a lot of things. Because we can't see it, it doesn't mean it's not there.
Right.
But we can move our hand or move our bodies and feel it. But there is, so movement is the basis of the air phase. And when it becomes more intense, we can feel it as wind. And wind, of course, we know can dry our skin. So it sucks up the moisture. And of course, that can lead to chapped skin or rough skin. So we get the quality of rough. And it also is clear, like I said, we can't see it, so we can see right through it. But it's also very subtle because it doesn't hit us unless it's a wind. So the air phase has much more density than the space phase. So, but then again, there's that potential for friction. And with that potential, that evolving potential for friction, we come to the fire phase. So in the fire phase, bites my touch, eats all I give, dancer of grace, giver of life, it lights my path. So we know that fire with the friction is hot. Eats all I give. In other words, we understand in Ayurveda that Agni, fire, is the foundation of our digestion as well as digestion in the mind. So eats all I give is anything that comes to us or that we ingest, whether it be ideas or food, of course, will have to be digested, and we need heat for that. So that's the fire phase. Dancer of grace. Well, it has that beautiful movement. I'm sure everybody has watched a fire burning. And giver of life. Without fire, we wouldn't be able to survive. And of course, it lights my path, so it lights our way forward. But the qualities of fire come from the friction of the particles. So then we have the water phase, and the water is the moisture giver. It chills my touch, and unhurried runs through my hand, protesting containment by its burden. So in the physics of that is that the essential parts of an acid, which are basically fires, when you mix fire and water, and the acid parts are separated. When they're separated, they become ions of water, which are hydrogen and hydroxide. And that the fire phase, that is the fire phase, as it transforms, it separates, becoming water and inert salt compounds. So, which will then be, or the potential for that, which will then be the earth phase, which is the next one. And in this thermochemical reaction, potential heat is released, and that condenses matter. So when you take heat out, or when you take energy out of matter, it slows down. And as it slows down, of course, it condenses, which makes us able to see it. And it leaves the water phase colder and denser than the fire phase. So remember, cold is merely the absence of heat. So, of course, water gives us moisture. It's cold because it has that absence of heat. And it runs through your hand. It doesn't like to be contained, but you can contain it. But it's also very heavy, so and very fluid. But it's also dull as opposed to sharp. So that's how we get the qualities of water from, and that's the physics of the thermochemical reaction that transfers the fire element or phase into the water phase. If I could back up a little bit, well, no, I won't back up. I'll go back into that in a minute, into Vata Kapha. So then we have the earth phase, and the earth phase is unmoving, arduous, intense, chill, dependable, and oh, so loving. So what do we know about the earth phase? And the earth phase is again those salt particles, salt meaning compounds, that are left over after the water phase, after the moisture is removed from the water phase. So, and again, it has a very slow atomic motion because it is much more solid than the water phase. Mm-hmm. And so it is cold, and it also is drying because remember, we took the water out, but it also can hold water. So it can dry our skin and our bodies, but it's also loving in the sense that it's very nutritious. So Earth has all those salts and compounds that nourish life. But without the water phase, you don't have that nourishment. So, or the nourishment can't get into the body. Right. So we have that aspect of the earth phase. So of course, when we combine the space and air phase, we get vata. Mm-hmm. And if you would like, I can read about vata and how it combines those qualities. So vata, a mind, a windswept landscape, slight for resistance, no friction for fire. Lithe as a whip, moves at the touch of a thought for its own sake. Agitated leaves in the breeze, jumpy as joy, slumber obscure. Fickle is the day, random desire, merging rations fitful. Arid topical zone, irregular grit, forgetful thirst. Clear for inspiration, artist in flight, no landings here. Mm. So that kind of exemplifies the mobile and cold aspects of vata. Mm-hmm. They're constantly moving. They're constantly, they don't sleep well, generally. They love to just keep moving. They're the one person who is sitting in the chair shaking his leg all the time. Right. But they also tend to be very creative. Uh-huh. But they never land on one thing all the time. They're constantly moving from one thing to another because they are mobile. Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful.
So then we have the next would be Pitta, radiant heat, furious fire when stirred, touch warm, surface like Mars, piercing psyche, imaginative insight, decisive determination, winsome wit. Data digested, feasts transformed, words a banquet, intelligence feeding, deeds doing, feats finished, poise plenty, confidence certain. Mm. And that exemplifies Pitta in the sense that, of course, heat is their main aspect, and they have very warm bodies. They have a piercing psyche. They can be, they're very insightful. They're very witty. They can digest information as easily as they can digest food, and they are doers. They're the doers of the world. They get things done, and they generally have a lot of confidence. Mm. So that is the fire and water aspect of Pitta. And then we have Kapha. Balmy is the heart. Cool is the essence. Heavy in mass, buoyant of spirit. Measured movement, leisured days, load increasing, burdensome body. Mighty muscle, enduring endurance, mindful memory, dampness diminishes. Fondness for forgiving, contented devotion, faithful friend, patient partner. Giving gentle, deep desire, consistent, caring, loving lives. So kapha is that nurturing, that earth and water, the water and earth phases that are so nurturing. Of course, you combine water and earth and you get soil in which you can grow plants or anything else that will nourish our bodies and create the beautiful greenery we see in our world. But again, they are heavy because water and earth are both extremely heavy. But they tend to have a lot of bulk on the body, or more bulk than say vata or even pitta. And they have a tendency to have too much water and too much earth because they like to eat generally. But they are because they're so nurturing, they can be faithful friends, patient partners, gentle giving. They're wonderful and very much an important part of the people in our world. And I think once you understand, deeply understand, integrate, and make this part of your thinking, then Ayurveda becomes so basic and so beautiful to what you see in the world. And you can relate everything in the world to Ayurveda and the 5 elements and understand things according to that. You can understand people according to who they are and what doshas they exhibit. So to me, there's nothing more beautiful than that. But then again, we have Chinese medicine with yin and yang and their concepts of relativity, which is also so important. But that's another story.
That's another story. Yes, but it's so true. I feel, I'm always saying this, that Ayurveda is so logical, and just with this understanding, we can navigate our own path and the world a lot easier, having compassion for others too, and understanding that the different doshic makeups, different unique constitutions will navigate the world differently. So we need to have compassion for others and awareness of that.
I would say that sums it up pretty well, is having compassion in the patients to understand people and therefore give them the leeway to be who they are.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I really love, Dr. Judyth, that you're merging your scientific mind with the poetry. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And this goes into my next question for you, which is, again, I'm going to quote from the book at the start, where you said, Western culture is held captive by materialism that recognizes only one aspect of our lives, material substance and quantifiable data, as the only acceptable reality. So what I'd love to ask you now on this, like you're merging the scientific with the creative poetry. So how is this reality that we have in the West, this reality of material substance and quantifiable data, how is this, as you say, denying of the poetry of experience?
Well, the denying of the poetry of experience is not only affecting the appreciation of Eastern medicine, specifically Ayurveda in this case, but the appreciation of all life. Life is poetic. It is not a set of numbers. And I think that Western culture has tried to make it so, as exemplified by doctors who read only test reports and their numbers to determine who is sitting in front of them, if they even look at them. And this denial enables people to see all life, all ecosystems as commodities. And of course, once you see something as a commodity, it objectifies it and negates any value that is inherent in, say, a forest, a river, animals, even people. And that makes them expendable. When you are able to see life as a commodity. And our institutions, including Western medicine, were built with this materialist mindset.
Right.
And the Western medicine structure was organized in 1900, actually, by the very wealthy Carnegie and so forth. And it was structured mainly to create wealth. So the object of the medicine, Western medicine, when it was designed, when it was structurally designed, it would have existed about 50 to 75 years before that. But when it was structurally designed as it is today, people were never the purpose. People were the means to create the wealth. So we have become, and that's how we're seen in Western medicine, is as commodities to create wealth.
Yeah.
Now, if you sat down with a doctor today, they wouldn't say that, because I really, truly believe the individual doctors care. They do care, but they're stuck in this structure that makes them see people as commodities, as numbers on a page.
Yeah.
So this materialist mindset enables corporations, governments, and other institutions like Western medicine to see people as a means to an end, as well as all our resources on our planet, including the animals that we use for our food. Well, I don't use it, but most people do.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. Very good point. And this desire is particularly in Western medicine for quantifiable data, that how is that affecting our appreciation of Eastern herbal medicine in the West?
Well, again, it denies the poetry of experience, and the poetry of life, because life, like I was saying, is not numbers.
Yes,
you can't bring a person's life to a common denominator of a number or numbers. And that's what is always done. You know, we always get these statistics. A government gives us statistics and all kinds of things. And that's the materialistic viewpoint. But that's basically devaluing the experience of the people who make up those statistics. It's meaningless. And we've been taught to take it as fact. But okay, the numbers are facts, but that it does not sum up life. Where is the poetry of experience and life in those numbers? They're not there. They can't be there. They never will be there.
Right.
So numbers, I love mathematics more, as much as anybody else, or more so, but because it has its own harmony. But where's the music? I mean, where is the music in the notes? You can write notes all day long, but unless they're played out, you don't hear the music.
Right. And it's you know, in modern Western medicine, it was focused on the physical structures of the body, the physical systems of the body, whereas in Ayurveda or other Eastern medicines, it's the energy behind the structures, right?
Well, it's more than the energy. It's its relationship.
Very true.
And interdependence on the other structures of the body. It's that cooperation internally that goes on, and that communication that goes on that makes each part have its value. When you take that part out, and try to dissect it, it's meaningless, because it has really no value outside of its system that you took it out of. So you basically destroy its value and its meaning when you do that.
The systems view of life.
Yes. So the systems view of life is about, interrelatedness, interdependence. It's about connection, relationships. It's about patterns. It's about context. And we forget that in our culture. We forget that the context of the person, who is the person, is so important. So how do you take those numbers and put it into the context? Well, you can't. You have to use poetry to do that. But that connection, those relationships, those patterns, that context is what Eastern medicine is all about. So the essential properties of a living system are the properties of the whole system, which none of the parts have. So each part is so integral, and its value can only be in the relationship to the whole. And when you take it out of that whole, out of that context, you destroy the essential properties of the parts and eventually of the whole when you dissect the system. It's meaningless.
Right.
It's meaningless.
Yeah, and that's an understanding that we have to get to, where we are a part of the whole.
Yes.
Yeah.
And therefore, in the context of herbal medicine, you cannot know the effect of an herb, for example, by dissecting it into its chemical constituents. It doesn't make any sense. And
right, it's the intelligence.
It's the connection of the intelligence. And Eastern medicine inherently knows this, especially Ayurveda, as exemplified, going back to the beginning, by the functional principles.
And can you explain to us, Dr. Judyth, the concept that you mentioned in the book of feedback loops? You mentioned that in relation to systems thinking and the systems view of life.
Yes. So feedback loops occur in nature, and all intelligent and we call them nonlinear systems. So humans are a nonlinear system. Ecosystems are nonlinear systems. And they are all systems, if I can repeat myself here. The feedback loops self-regulate the processes occurring within its own system to produce large effects with small changes. So you can change an entire ecosystem or the body with small things like herbs. Basically, feedback loops utilize the output of the system to adjust the system to meet a desired response that can be very different than the original output. In other words, a living system learns to improve itself by using these feedback loops. For example, a virus will continually mutate, as we're finding out, to find a way to survive and invade a host. So, you may change some of the aspects of the host by giving it, we call them vaccines. They're really not, but then the virus, because it has such a short lifespan and can easily mutate, it will continually find a way to invade that host. So unless you strengthen the host in some way to fight against that virus, the virus will continually do what it does. That's what viruses do.
And
that's what life does.
Exactly. Absolutely. And you gave some great examples in the book of the feedback loops in nature. Can you give us some of those stories, a couple of those stories, because they were great?
Yeah, the one was it's a beautiful video. It's available online about how wolves change ecosystems and how originally the ecosystem of a particular river was being destroyed because all of the elk and deer and other wildlife would hang out around the river and trample all the grasses and greenery around that river, and enabling and actually creating more erosion, so that the river then became more dammed up by a lot of silt. So when they introduced the wolf, they thought, okay, we're going to keep the elk population down because of the wolves. Well, it turned out that not only did the wolves keep the population down, but it changed the course of the river because the elk could no longer hang out in the open around the rivers. And so all the greenery and all the trees and all the bushes came back and actually changed the river, making it much more healthy and less accumulation of silt in the river. So it became a healthier river. So, and then of course it had all these other changes in the environment, and how one species affected the other species, affected another species, and how it enhanced and made the entire ecosystem healthier for everybody, just by reintroducing the wolf.
I think it's fascinating to like that, these feedback loops and how one little piece of the chain is changed and how it affects everything else, just like in our bodies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And herbal medicine does this so beautifully. I mean, it's a small thing, or it appears to be a small thing, but I kind of see it as a blueprint, reminding the body how to behave the way it in a way that is much more healthy than the way it may be currently behaving. Right. I use the example of an orchestra playing a symphony, and we have different sections of the orchestra. We have the violin section, the percussion section, the horn section, and so on. And one day, all of a sudden, for whatever reason, one of the violinists starts playing out of tune. And the guy next to him gets aggravated, and he starts playing out of tune. And they're before you know it, this is insidiously spreading. So what Western medicine would normally do is go into the orchestra and and quiet the violinists who are out of tune.
Yeah.
So, but this changes the symphony in the sense that now we're missing 3 to 5 violins, and the music is never quite the same when you take those violinists out. So now we have 5 violinists or whatever who are not, we can't hear them anymore. So, but the problem is still spreading insidiously from violinist to violinist. So eventually what will happen is the entire violin section will not be even heard. So no longer do we have a symphony. Right. So that's what Western medicine would do. In Eastern medicine, what we do is we gently go in and say, hey, violinist, here's how to play properly. Here's how to get back in tune. And they go, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that. And so they get back in tune, and all of a sudden we have a symphony once again. But in Western medicine, that changes. We no longer have the music of a symphony. We have pieces missing.
Right. So we're just covering up.
Suppressing the noise that is occurring. Yes.
Yeah. Instead of giving the body the right healing environment, as you say. And, we understand that Eastern medicine is as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. And, like you're saying, modern medicine is focused on sick care or disease management, as you mentioned in the book. So what, in your opinion, Dr. Judyth, is the future of medicine? It's a big question.
Well, that is a good question. Well, personally, the way it's currently structured, I don't see a future for medicine, Western medicine, except for trauma medicine. Again, I mentioned that back in the 1900s, well, I didn't mention, but back in the 1900s, a lot of people died from trauma, and they didn't live long enough to have disease as we have today.
Right.
Of course, they also didn't have what I call corporate food to toxify our systems and clog it up with unnecessary substances that corporate food puts into their so-called food. So what I see is that medicine currently has to be completely redesigned from the bottom up. And when I say the bottom, I'm talking by we have to train doctors to think systemically. So in the way of systems. And to me, Eastern medicine, we already have the blueprint for that. We already have that map. So why don't we teach them the concepts behind Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, classical Chinese medicine? Why don't we teach them those concepts, change the way they think, which will change the way they do things, which will change them. It's just like that ecosystem, which will then change how the system is structured, which will then change how people are treated in the system.
Yes.
And then we will have doctors who understand, I'm not going to go in and suppress the violinist who's not playing in tune. I'm going to go in and show that violinist how to get back in tune so that the body as a whole becomes healthier. So that goes back to that whole wolf in the ecosystem, or being introduced into the ecosystem, and how the cascade effect of that introduction changed the entire ecosystem and made it so much healthier. And that's what needs to be done. And I make a suggestion in my book on how to do that. Of course, that would mean training doctors in Eastern medicine. And I'm hoping that at some point I'll be able to do that or help with that.
Great.
So that they will start thinking differently and demanding changes in the current structure and the rebuilding of medicine to be more compassionate, not based on wealth, not based on people being the means, but people being the purpose.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. And you can imagine that it would make their job much more interesting rather than take this pill for this condition, that it's more of a combined investigation with them and their patient. So it's kind of trying to find the root. So it makes it so much more interesting.
Oh, by far. And that most doctors that I have spoken with are not really happy with the system at all.
Yeah.
They don't feel like they're really helping their patients.
Right.
They don't feel, they feel like technicians, which basically they are. They're just reading lab reports or sending them to the mechanics to see what they can do about this part or that part. But truly, most doctors are not very happy with the system because they really can't do the job that they signed up for.
Exactly.
And so they want to see the change. So I believe that if this were introduced to medical schools, and you probably have to introduce it at more of a grassroots level rather than at the top, because our leaders currently are still thinking mechanistically, still thinking reduction-wise, still thinking linearly, still thinking that we can glean some kind of result from these numbers, the statistics. And so unless you have a very insightful and visionary person at the top, which is what we need in our leadership today, in the medical schools, then they will immediately go, "Oh no, that's not scientific." And I'm saying, excuse me, it is scientific. It's very scientific. If you read this, you'll see it's very scientific. So but of course, medicine is not a science. It never was a science. It could never be a science because we're dealing with values. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with systems, and you can't make medicine value free. It's impossible. Well, you can see what it's done to the people who are involved in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, their hands are tied.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. They are. Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Judyth, I feel like you're such a prime example of somebody that kind of stepped out of the system and found your own way. And it's kind of, culminated in your years of practice and all your study, but also in this book of the physics and poetry of Eastern herbal medicine. So it's not just, you didn't just use one part of your skill set, the scientific brain, but you also brought in this creative aspect. And I feel that's a lesson to all of us that we need to really embrace all our skill sets and not define ourselves by one thing or what we think society wants. We need to really stand in our unique truth. And we are a system in ourselves, and we need to bring all our skill sets into that system and bring that into the world.
Absolutely. Sooner the better.
The sooner the better, that we all have every instrument in our orchestra playing in order to really feel fulfilled in life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mind, body, spirit, all of it.
Yes. Well, Dr. Judyth, this time has flown by. And as we finish up here, is there anything else you'd like to share before we finish up and before I ask you to find out where people can find out more about you and your book?
I think I've said most of what I feel I need to
Great.
say. I would say I think it's time for all of us to start looking for visionary people to lead us, as opposed to politically correct, wealthy. We need to demand a better system in our political system, so that our world can improve.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we can get into a more holistic mindset and being part of the whole rather than this reductionist thinking.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Wonderful. So Dr. Judyth, can you please tell people where they can find out more information about you and this wonderful book, The Physics and Poetry of Eastern Herbal Medicine?
Yes, I have a website. It's judythshamosh.com. That's JUDYTHSHAMOSH.com. So you can find out a little bit more about me or contact me if I don't know about being able to ship my book internationally, but in the States, I know I can ship books and sign books from my website. So you can purchase it on my website. I've been having some difficulty getting books internationally across the pond, so to speak. But tomorrow, as of tomorrow, technically, I believe it will be available on Amazon, at Barnes & Noble and other international resource places. So hopefully, if you cannot get a signed copy from me, hopefully you can get a copy anyway from those sources.
Wonderful. And that's April 1st.
That's April 1st, hopefully tomorrow. And
yes,
also, I would very much enjoy hearing any kind of feedback from whoever reads my book, so that I can, so in my next book, which I have started actually writing, I would like to hear more of what people would like to hear, and give some input into that.
Wonderful. That sounds great. And Dr. Judyth, do you still have an active clinic?
Yes, I do. I'm not there very often. I'm not there very often, but I do actually still have my clinic. Yes.
And that's located where, if people are interested?
In Phoenix, Arizona.
Great. Okay.
Yes.
And all that information is on your website as well. And I'll put all those links in the show notes. So please just hop over to the show notes and we'll get you over to Dr. Judyth.
Yes.
Dr. Judyth, it's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And again, I loved your book, and this information you're putting out into the world is really valuable. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing, Colette. I really appreciate your addition to all of this.
It's truly my pleasure. Best of luck with the book release, and come back and talk to us again sometime.
I would love to. Thank you, Colette.
Okay, Dr. Judyth, take good care of yourself.
You too.
Bye for now. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Judyth, and please check out the show notes for all the links mentioned. If you think this episode will be interesting to family or friends, please share it with them so we can spread this wisdom. And also in the show notes, you'll find the link to my online services on my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, where I provide online consultations, at-home cleanse tailored to you, and also educational programs. If you have any questions on my services, you can book a free 15-minute Services Enquiry Call. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do so. And if you would like to rate and review the podcast, I would really appreciate that. Help us spread this wisdom of Ayurveda. And don't forget to follow me on Facebook and Instagram under Elements Healing and Wellbeing.